Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're stepping right into a dimly lit, incredibly atmospheric archive of the mind. Think of it as a grand codex that catalogs exactly how humanity has managed to cope with the sheer weight of its own existence. It's essentially a grim, dark fable, a disciplined descent into the seduction of melancholy. We're going to strip away the fictions of life, layer by layer, to uncover a very unique, hard-won kind of peace. Right out of the gate, we're slammed with a monumental, agonizing problem. Seriously, how does an overdeveloped mind actually survive a universe that just refuses to answer its questions? We're walking around with these massive brains that absolutely crave meaning and justice, right? Yet we live in this vast, totally silent biosphere that was quite literally never built to supply those things. It's a heavy, heavy thought. But understanding how we translate that silence into actual survival, well, that's exactly what we're unpacking today. So here is our roadmap into this holding company of past thinkers. We'll look at the masks of melancholy, starting in antiquity with Koheleth, then move through the 19th century existentialists' purifying fire, hit the 20th century with Zappe's evolutionary mismatch, and finally arrive at eternity with Sisyphus and durable peace. Okay, our very first mask is Koheleth from antiquity. This guy measures the arithmetic of the sun and comes to a stark realization. The wise and the fool, they both ultimately end up in the exact same grave. But here's the twist. Instead of just spiraling into despair, Koheleth acts like a philologist of human suffering. He takes this biblical vapor, this vanity, and actually translates it into a furnished sanctuary. He sets our baseline, proving that in this universe, effort and outcome, they just aren't bound together. As we venture a little deeper into the codex, the air definitely gets thinner. We run into the 19th century existential mask. Now, these thinkers, like Kierkegaard with his intense concept of dread, and Nietzsche with his profound solitude, they relocate the wound completely inward. They take this dread and turn it into a purifying fire. And no, this isn't some warm, cozy campfire. This fire burns away every single one of our borrowed certainties. It leaves nothing but the bare self, standing totally alone, authoring its own solitary walk. Then we hit the 20th century, and philosophers like Peter Wessel-Zapffe take things a huge step further. Zapffe looks at consciousness and diagnoses it. He argues that our self-awareness isn't some beautiful gift at all. It's actually a biological mistake, an evolutionary mismatch. It's like humanity got a tragic software update that makes us relentlessly hunger for a meaning nature simply cannot supply. So our tragedy isn't just a streak of bad luck. Our minds have quite literally grown too large for their environment. Try to picture Zapfe's slender essay sitting right there on the absolute coldest shelf of this dark archive. It's on the shelf without bread because honestly, it offers zero modest consolation. Once we really recognize this evolutionary excess, the whole heroic human project of meaning-making gets brutally exposed. It's suddenly revealed as an absurd performance playing out in front of a completely empty house. Zapfe figured that to cope, we lean on defense mechanisms, things like isolation or distraction, but those just postpone the inevitable confrontation. So, what's our move? How do we respond to this terminal diagnosis? Well, the archive offers two distinct paths. On one hand, you've got Zapfe, who thinks this biological disease of consciousness can only be managed by hiding and using those defensive strategies just to survive. But then, on the other hand, you have Albert Camus' absurd hero. This hero outright rejects that kind of management. Instead of hiding behind distractions, Camus' hero chooses lucid revolt, a practical, unadorned discipline. And this brings us to the fourth witness in our descent. Sisyphus appears in the doorway. Now, you probably know the myth, right? The guy condemned by the gods to push a massive boulder up a mountain, only to watch it roll right back down, literally forever. But here's the thing. Sisyphus doesn't show up in our codex to refute Zapfe's grim diagnosis. Not at all. Instead, he embodies it. He translates that evolutionary excess into the daily discipline of labor without a rival. He proves that this tragic surplus of awareness is something you can actually carry rather than something you have to cure. I absolutely love this perspective. The interval that truly captivates Camus isn't the agonizing, grueling upward push. It's the rockless descent. Just think about that specific moment. Sisyphus is walking back down the mountain. This is a moment of pure, unadulterated consciousness. He knows exactly what's waiting for him at the bottom. He knows the boulder is always going to return, and yet he chooses to keep going. He walks down with his eyes wide open. During this rockless descent, Sisyphus is walking an incredibly disciplined path. He absolutely refuses to take a leap into some invented, comforting purpose. He's not tricking himself into believing his boulder is secretly building the pyramids, you know? But at the same time, he refuses to collapse into total despair or suicide. He holds the tension of the absurd wide open. It's a beautiful demonstration that our overdeveloped minds don't need to be snuffed out. We can actually train them to inhabit their own excess without demanding that the silent universe suddenly speak up and hand us a reason. So, how do we actually pull this off in real life? How does this discipline rewire our psychology? It's all about repetition. Let's break it down. Step 1 is acute anguish. That's the very first time you feel that evolutionary mismatch and the floor completely gives way. Step 2 is honest recurrence. Walking back down the mountain and facing that exact same anguish again under identical conditions. And step 3 is the real breakthrough, a sustainable vigil. Through sheer repetition, the terror finally settles. The groundlessness itself actually becomes the floor.
Imagine Sisyphus on his 400th descent. At that point, the acute anguish just stops behaving like a five-alarm fire. Melancholy shifts from a bleeding wound to just the weather. It's no longer this massive crisis you desperately need to fix. It's simply the climate your mind learns to inhabit without constant complaint. That is how you transform an evolutionary excess from a terminal diagnosis into a hard-won steadiness that you can carry with you every single day.
Let's zoom back out to our dark library for a second. We start to realize something really vital about translating this silent universe. Why do we even catalog all these past thinkers? Because the simple presence of their texts proves that this overwhelming surplus of consciousness has been survived by other honest minds before us. The true purpose of this holding company isn't to confirm some grand universal meaning of life. It's just to provide company. And honestly, the Dark Sage's room feels a whole lot less empty once you realize you aren't alone in the absurdity. Now, Sisyphus doesn't just toss those earlier thinkers aside. He actually masterfully gathers them into a single, sustained posture. He holds on to Koheleth's observation that effort and outcome aren't tied together. He fully embraces the existentialist's solitary authorship of the walk. And he accepts Zaffe's totally clean admission that absolutely no purpose is waiting at the summit. Vanity, freedom, and the complete absence of a final destination, he manages to hold the whole shebang inside one continuing labor without a single contradiction. And here is the true, ultimate conclusion of this dark fable. It's not about annihilation, and it is definitely not a descent into total despair. When clarity is carried all the way down that mountain and back up again, over and over, it terminates in peace. But we're talking about a very specific kind of durable peace, a peace that owes the mountain absolutely nothing. It doesn't rely on the boulder magically staying at the top, or the universe finally answering our deep questions. The peace comes entirely from the discipline itself. Inside that candlelit chamber of the mind, the answer this codex finally hands us isn't some shiny, brand new meaning to life. It is simply the decision to keep the difficulty company without demanding that it change. The candle, the stone, the evolutionary excess, they are all just different names for the exact same unadorned discipline. Every night, the doorway stays open, the boulder remains exactly what it is, and the mind continues to ask questions. But the entire descent resolves into one patient, incredibly sufficient act of simply remaining. Which leaves us with one final, pretty heady thought for your own life. When you inevitably face the mountain silence, when you really feel the friction of your own overdeveloped mind desperately searching for meaning in a quiet universe, how are you going to respond? Are you going to demand an answer that just isn't coming, triggering endless anguish? Or will you embrace the discipline of Sisyphus and choose to make a home in the rockless descent? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I'll see you in the next one.